Hello and welcome back. We are going to be back in the book of Hebrews, studying beginning in chapter 8. My name is Nathan House and I am with the Houston Church of Christ. And again, I would encourage you, if you could like or subscribe this video, that would be helpful to me. So we're going to be in Hebrews chapter 8, and we're not going to do this entirely like we normally do when we study the book of Hebrews or any other passage. We're going to actually kind of highlight a theme that runs through chapter 8, 9, and 10 and talk about that. We'll come back and look at chapter 8 in a little more detail another time or next time. But what I want to draw your attention to right now is a phrase or this idea that is occurring in the book of Hebrews. And it's really interesting, and I hope you'll find it interesting, and I hope you find it beneficial to you in your studies as well. But let's read through these first few verses of Hebrews chapter 8. Now, the point in what we are saying is this: we have such a high priest, one who is seated at the right hand of the throne of majesty in heaven, a minister in the holy places, in the true tent that the Lord set up, not man. For every high priest is appointed to offer gifts and sacrifices. Thus it is necessary for this priest also to have something to offer. Now, if he were on earth, he would not be a priest at all, since there are priests who offer gifts according to the law. They serve a copy and shadow of the heavenly things. For when Moses was about to erect the tent, he was instructed by God, saying, "See that you make everything according to the pattern that was shown to you on the mountain." But as it is, Christ has obtained a ministry that is as much more excellent than the old, as the covenant he mediates is better, since it is enacted on better promises. So notice a couple of things here real quickly that are kind of interesting. Again, this idea of a priest goes back to Psalm chapter 110, verse 4, which the Hebrew writer has been discussing at length. Go back and watch the last couple of videos and you'll see what I'm talking about. But he has been discussing this idea of the high priest, a lot in a lot of detail. And so Jesus Christ is this high priest, this one who resembles Melchizedek, a high priest forever. And again, you'll notice this, that he, Jesus Christ, now the point is this. I'm trying to sum it up for you, he says. This is the point. We have a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven. Watch verse 2. He is a minister in the holy places. Now, he brings up this idea of Jesus Christ serving or ministering in this holy place. And look at what he calls it here in verse 2. This holy place, this heavenly place, it's the true tent. See, this idea of true tent is set in contrast to the idea of the earthly tabernacle, right? Moses was told to build a tent. God gave him instructions. Right here it says in verse 5, he told Moses to build the tent, right? He was about erecting the tent. Build the tent according to the pattern. And by the way, just real quickly, side note, it is important that we do things according to the pattern that God has shown us. Moses didn't have the right to say, you know what, I don't like his pattern, I'm going to do my own thing here. Moses was expected, and he dutifully obeyed to build the tent, the tabernacle, after the pattern God gave him. But what I want you to see here is that the tabernacle, the tent that Moses built, it was not the true tent. It was a copy, it was a shadow of what is the true tent, the glorious tent, the heavenly tent. The tabernacle on earth simply was a shadow of what is real. You walk down the road and it's on a sunny day, you see your shadow on the sidewalk, right? That's not the true you. That is a copy. That's not the reality. And so this tent, this tabernacle that Moses built, it was a shadow of something much greater that exists in heaven. It was a shadow, it was a copy of something so much greater, so much more significant. And again, notice how he describes this. He is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, a minister in the holy places, in the true tent. And again, this tent wasn't set up by Moses, right? Moses had to build this tent in verse 5, but this tent was set up by the Lord. This was the true tent set up by the Lord. Then he continues with this verse here, verse 3. For every priest is appointed to offer gifts and sacrifices. Thus it is necessary for this priest, so just like every other high priest, this priest, who's this priest? It's Jesus Christ. It was necessary for this priest to have something to offer as well. In the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, of course, the high priest would bring and make a sacrifice before they entered into the Holy of Holies. On the Day of Atonement, they had to offer sacrifices first for their own sins, then for the sins of the people. And so just like in the copy or the shadow, in the true tent, there also had to be something to offer. Verse 3. Verse 4. Now, if he were on earth, this high priest, this Jesus Christ, he would not be a priest at all. Why wouldn't he be a priest if he was on earth? Because serving as a high priest on earth meant you were from the tribe of Levi. This has already been discussed a little bit earlier, but this meant you were from the tribe of Levi. Of course, Jesus Christ was not from the tribe of Levi. He was from the tribe of Judah. So if Jesus Christ was serving as a high priest on earth, he couldn't be a priest according to the law. So there had to be a change in the law so Jesus Christ could serve as high priest. And he was never intending to serve as high priest on earth. He was intending, God's intention for him was for him to serve as high priest in the heavenly places. Go ahead back to this verse 4. Now, if he were on earth, he would not be a priest at all, since there are priests who offer gifts according to the law. Verse 5, they serve, the priests on earth, they serve a copy. They serve a shadow of the heavenly things. Verse 6, but as it is, Christ has obtained a ministry of what? Right? Go back here to verse 2. He serves as minister in the holy place. See, they serve, the idea of serving and ministry, they're, the same idea, right? They serve a copy. Christ is a minister. He is serving in the holy places. Verse 6, Christ has obtained a service or a ministry that is much more excellent than their ministry. Just as the old covenant, just as the new covenant that he mediates is much greater than the covenant that they worked under. Why is it so much greater? Because the covenant Christ works for, under, instituted. It's enacted on better promises. His promise, the promises that his covenant is built upon, is that God would God would forgive them of their sins. He would not remember their sins anymore. And you can come down and we'll talk about this more next time. But look at chapter 8, verse 12. But let's continue on with this idea of copies. Chapter 9, verse 23. Let's look at this. Thus it was necessary for the copies of the heavenly things. So again, we see this idea that there are heavenly things and there's copies of them. The things that the earthly priests did, they served in the copies. They served in the tabernacle Moses built, not the true tabernacle. That was a copy. That was a shadow. It was necessary for the copies. These copies had to be purified. So do the heavenly things. But the things that purified the copies, animal sacrifices and whatnot, these were insufficient to purify the heavenly things. Look at what he says. The heavenly things themselves had to be purified, going back to here, with better sacrifices. They had to be purified with better sacrifices. And again, tie this back into chapter 8, right? Where we see this. They had to have something to offer. Right? There had to be something to offer. There had to be a sacrifice, a gift. And so here we come back to this idea of what is offered. What is the gift? But these heavenly things, they were purified with better sacrifices than these things on earth. For Christ has entered. So how were they purified? What is this better sacrifice? What was this thing that was offered? For Christ has entered not into holy places made with hands. See again this idea of copies and shadows. Made with hands versus contrasted. Moses made that tent with his hands, contrasted that with what God made. The Lord made the true tabernacle. Christ has entered not into the holy place made with hands. Well, those are things that are copies. They're copies of the true things. But Christ has entered into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. You see, he's ministering in those better places, in the presence of God. Right behind that whole, in the tabernacle of the Old Testament, we had that curtain that separated the holy from the Holy of Holies. The high priest went in there. He served the people. And so Jesus Christ, our high priest, has gone into behind the curtain, into the presence of God to minister on our behalf. And he did this, again, verse 25. He's entered into heaven now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. Nor was it to offer himself repeatedly. He's not going to offer himself repeatedly. Every year the high priest had to offer a sacrifice. But Jesus Christ doesn't have to do that. It was not to offer himself repeatedly, as the high priest enters the holy place every year with blood not his own. For then he, talking about Jesus, for then Jesus would have to suffer repeatedly since the foundation of the world. But as it is, he has appeared. He's appeared in the presence of God. He has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to put away sin. He's putting away sin. Those sacrifices were insufficient. They couldn't put away sin. They were a reminder of sin. But Jesus Christ, his ministry, his sacrifice was to put away sins by the sacrifice of himself. So Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time. Chapter 10, verse 1. Watch this idea of shadow and true and copies continues. For since the law has but a shadow of the good things to come. The law kind of hinted at these good things to come, but it didn't really understand them. The law didn't completely reveal them. The Jews who read the law, they didn't understand completely the good things to come. The Jews were confused by it. And in fact, those who still today are trying to hold on to the old covenant, some today are trying to blend Christianity with Judaism. They're holding on to things that are a shadow. They're holding on to things that are a copy. They're a shadow of the good things to come. They are not, look at what he says here in verse 1, they are not the true form. They're not the true form of the realities. They're a shadow, they're a copy. So this again, look at this, but since the law has a shadow of the good things to come instead of the true form of the realities, the law can never by the same sacrifices that are continually offered every year make perfect those who draw near. We draw near to God through Jesus Christ, who's appearing to God. He's appearing in the true tent, the true tabernacle, in heaven itself. He appears in the presence of God on our behalf. And this is a theme that also runs through the book of Hebrews, that these things are done for us. The angels are ministering spirits sent to serve us. Jesus Christ does these things on our behalf. What a beautiful, amazing, and wonderful reminder that God did these things. Jesus Christ did these things for us. I want to put on the screen real quickly just some of these things we've talked about. I'm going to try to get myself out of the screen a bit so you can see this a little bit. So there's this contrast here. Let's come up here. There's a contrast between copy and shadow versus the true, right? We've kind of already seen this. There's a shadow. There's this copy, this tabernacle that Moses built, this tent that Moses built, the holy place that was physically there. These were a copy. They were a shadow. There were gifts that were offered, right? Sacrifices that were offered. The law, these were gifts. These were copies. They were shadow. But the true things that are real, the things that are the reality of these things, not the shadow that's cast on the ground because of the person that's walking there, the true person, the true things. Look at what it says, going back to chapter 8, verse 2. And again, you can read along with your own Bible. I'll read it to you. I'm not going to put it back on the screen. Chapter 8, verse 2, talking about Jesus Christ. The point is this: we have such a high priest, one who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven. Listen to verse 2. A minister in the holy places, in the true tent that the Lord set up. You see, Jesus is the one who ministers in the true tent on our behalf. These things the true things are the heavenly things. Chapter 9, verse 23, which we read a minute ago, says, thus it was necessary for the copies of the heavenly things to be purified with these rites. But the heavenly things, how were they purified? With better sacrifices. The heavenly things were purified with the better sacrifice of Jesus Christ. So he talks about in chapter 9, verse 24, the true things, heaven itself, the true form of realities. Chapter 10, verse 1. So these things are contrasted, shadows and copies, with true. I want to take you real quickly to another text in the New Testament, the book of 1 Corinthians. Let me see if I can drop myself way down here. 2 Corinthians chapter, that's just going to be bad. 2 Corinthians chapter, that's even worse. All right, I'm off for a minute. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 14 through 16. I'm making myself laugh. But their minds were hardened. It's talking about the Israelites in the Old Testament. Their minds were hardened. Now he talks about how not only were they hardened then, but they're hardened now to this day, he's talking about the Jews who were still trying to insist on the old covenant being the old law, the Old Testament scriptures being understood in this literal sense. For to this day, when they read the old covenant, the same veil remains unlifted. You see, there remains on the eyes of the Jewish people, there is this veil so that they cannot see that the old covenant was pointing to Jesus Christ. These old things were talking about Jesus Christ, because only through Christ is the veil taken away. Yes, to this day, whenever Moses is read, a veil lies over their hearts. But when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. So to this day, there are some who do not see that the Old Testament, it's about Jesus Christ. A veil remains, and only when one turns to Christ is the veil removed. Let me see if I can put myself back on here and kind of out of the way as best I can. So what do we see from this? Jesus is the greater. So again, what is the true meaning of some of these Old Testament things? Jesus is the greater and more perfect high priest. You see, the Old Testament, Psalm chapter 110, verse 4, this image of Melchizedek in the book of Genesis, they find their true fulfillment, the greater and more perfect meaning, the true meaning is fulfilled in Jesus Christ. He is the greater and more perfect high priest who serves forever in the presence of God on our behalf. Go back and read some of these texts that I have on the screen. What is the true form? The true form is that Jesus is the greater and more perfect sacrifice, atoning forever for sins. Go back and read some of these passages that I have on the screen. He is the more perfect sacrifice. He is the more perfect high priest. Jesus is the minister in the true tabernacle. Go back and read what we've talked about. You know, in the book of Luke, when Jesus Christ had died, he'd been resurrected, he began walking with people before he was taken up into heaven, and he was trying to show people that the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, the old scriptures, they were pointing to him. They were about him. They found their fulfillment, their true meaning in him. So here we see here in Luke chapter 24, you can see it on the screen, verse 44. Then he, talking about Jesus, told them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was with you, that everything written about me." Again, look at this. They were written about me. Where were these things written about Jesus? They were written in the law. Those first 5 books of the Old Testament. They were written in the law of Moses. They were written in the prophets. They were written in the Psalms. Jesus says these things about me were written all through these different, again, the Jews divided the Old Testament in 3 divisions. In Jesus Christ, how interestingly that he points out 3 different divisions, doesn't he? These things were written about me. In the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms, these things written about me must be fulfilled. Now watch what it says in verse 45. Then he opened their minds. He opened their minds to understand the scriptures. You see, to this day, for there are some who, when they pick up the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, the scriptures, the law, the prophets, the Psalms, they don't see these things as being fulfilled in Jesus Christ. They don't understand that Jesus Christ is the Passover lamb. And again, don't go looking for things in the Old Testament and trying to apply them to Jesus Christ. Let the Old Testament explain to us which of these things apply to Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the Passover lamb. How do I know that? Because the Gospel of John highlights that Jesus Christ is the Passover lamb. The story of Jonah, which is a true story, but it finds a greater fulfillment and a greater meaning in Jesus Christ and his death his burial in the grave and his resurrection. How do I know that? Because the scriptures tell me. How do I know that Jesus Christ is the greater high priest, the greater sacrifice? How do I know that he is ministering in the true tent? Because the New Testament scriptures tell us these Old Testament passages were about Jesus Christ. You see, we don't have before us a copy and a shadow of these things. We have the true things. We have the true high priest who serves on our behalf in the presence of God, in the true heaven, in the true tabernacle, who offered himself as the true and more perfect and better sacrifice to atone for our sins forever. And he serves in the true tabernacle in the presence of God. I pray that this has been a blessing to you. And again, thank you guys for listening. Again, I'd ask if you could subscribe and like this video. That would be great. Thank you and have a blessed day.